Warden Clifford Rayburn was not the kind of man who sparked rumors. 57 years old, former Marine, no family photos on his desk, no social media footprint, a face made of stone and routines. For 12 years, he ran Eastbridge Correctional Facility like a silent machine. No leaks, no scandals, no questions. Just locked doors, shift reports, and his name on every disciplinary order, which is why what happened next didn't make sense to anyone. Her name on the intake sheet was Danielle Knox, age 32, charges, fraud, obstruction, and assaulting an officer during arrest. Sentence, 14 years. But there was something about her file that didn't sit right. Something redacted, a sealed juvenile record, medical details marked restricted. She arrived with a calm that unsettled even the toughest guards. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just smiled. Not warm, not fake, just like she knew how this place worked already. Danielle didn't talk much at first, kept to herself in the infirmary where she'd been placed during processing due to medical transition requirements. It was supposed to be temporary, but she never left that wing. Warden Rayburn signed the override personally. No one saw it coming, not Officer Lenny Gates, who ran intake and noticed Rayburn checking her file himself, not Nurse Petrovsky, who said Danielle somehow always got an extra 15 minutes alone in the medical office, and not the chaplain, who later claimed he saw the two walking the inner yard alone on 3 occasions, against every protocol in the book. Whispers started. The warden's been visiting the infirmary every night. She's got him under some kind of spell. He's going to lose everything for a man in makeup. No one said it to his face, of course. Rayburn had a way of looking at you that made you feel small without saying a word. But behind closed doors, Eastbridge buzzed like a hive on fire. And Danielle? She thrived. Her skin cleared. Her meals changed. Her access expanded. Inmates started calling her the First Lady. And when she got moved to her own private cell, clean, freshly painted, new bedding, no one believed it was a coincidence. Then came the wedding. No announcement. No notice. Just a paper trail leaked through a clerk who worked at the county office 2 towns over. Clifford Rayburn and Danielle Knox, legally married. 3 days before his body was found. The guards were the first to react. Some laughed nervously. Others were furious. He married that. She used him. He let his guard down, and she played him like a fiddle. But no one could deny the change in him. In his final week alive, Rayburn smiled more. He started wearing cologne again. One officer swore he saw him humming in the hallway. He wasn't acting like a man manipulated. He was acting like a man in love. And Danielle? She didn't show anything. Not joy, not victory, not concern. When she was told about his death, she blinked, looked down, then simply said, "Do I still get my hour outside?" The prison went quiet after that. Investigators came in, but files were missing. Camera logs were corrupted. Officers refused interviews or claimed they didn't know anything. Rayburn's body was found in his apartment. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, no weapon. Cause of death? Blunt trauma with complications. The case never made it to trial. Danielle was moved to another facility 2 weeks later. But even in her absence, Eastbridge wasn't the same. Warden Clifford Rayburn, the man who never broke a rule in his life, had married an inmate, and 3 days later, he was dead. No one knows what was said between them in those late-night visits. No one knows what she whispered during their vows. But one thing is certain. He didn't just let her in the system. He let her in his life. And someone made sure that decision cost him everything. It wasn't supposed to be legal. According to Eastbridge Correctional Policy, relationships between staff and inmates were not only forbidden, they were criminal, grounds for termination, grounds for prosecution. But Clifford Rayburn had found the loophole. A clause buried in a state regulation, so outdated it still used the word penitentiary. Marriage, even between a staff member and an inmate, wasn't explicitly prohibited. If both parties consented and no coercion could be proven, consent, that word would haunt every report that came after. On the morning of the ceremony, no alarms were raised. No special requests went up the chain. Just a quiet shift handoff and an unusually long meeting between Rayburn and facility chaplain, Reverend Douglas Ramey. Warden wants a private moment of prayer. Ramey later told Internal Affairs. What he didn't say, but what two guards watching security monitor whispered afterward, was that the chapel door had been locked for nearly an hour. Inside, Clifford Rayburn, Danielle Knox, and a marriage license dated 2 days prior. The footage of that hour? Gone. Corrupted file. IT said, no backups, no body cams, no witnesses. And yet, when Danielle walked back to the infirmary, she was wearing something new, a plain gold band. Small, subtle, resting on her left ring finger. She didn't flaunt it, didn't smile, but she touched it once briefly before disappearing into her cell. That was the only gesture of emotion she showed all day. Rayburn didn't report back to duty that afternoon. He didn't report back the next day either. He left the prison with a bag slung over his shoulder and didn't return a single call, text, or email. For the first time in 14 years, the man who enforced order with military precision vanished. On the surface, nothing happened. Eastbridge ran as usual. Shifts rotated. Doors locked. Inmates fed. But the tension was different. Guards talked in whispers, glancing over shoulders. Some refused to even use Danielle's name anymore. They called her the warden's mistake. Others weren't so subtle. Can you imagine? One CO muttered. He married that thing. He lost his damn mind. Another said, no way he was thinking straight. But what none of them could say out loud was this. They had no idea who Danielle Knox really was. Her record was spotless, almost too spotless. Aside from the fraud and assault charges, she had no documented history of violence. But the more investigators looked, the more gaps they found. She'd bounced through 3 different states in 5 years, lived under 2 legal names. And her transition? It had started just before her arrest. But the doctor who signed off on her hormone therapy disappeared 6 months after. Danielle didn't just hide her past. She edited it. Warden Rayburn either didn't see it or didn't care, because by the time he was found dead in his apartment, face down in a pool of blood, his ring still on his finger, the marriage had already been certified by the state. 3 days. That's all it lasted. The autopsy found bruising around the neck, but no signs of forced entry. The front door was locked. The windows shut. No evidence of another person inside. And Danielle? She hadn't left the facility. Her presence was confirmed by 2 different COs and the daily logbook. It wasn't her, Officer Finch insisted. She was in her cell the whole time. But somehow, she already knew he was gone. That evening, during cell checks, Danielle sat cross-legged on her mattress, a book unopened in her lap. When the officer passed by, she looked up and said, "Don't bother checking for B tomorrow. He won't be coming in." For B was Clifford Rayburn's office. The officer paused. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer, just returned her gaze to the book she wasn't reading. Word of the marriage spread faster than the coroner could issue a statement. The media didn't get hold of the story, at least not yet, but inside Eastbridge, it exploded like wildfire. Some staff refused to work in the same block. Others demanded she be transferred to another prison. Even the chaplain took early leave. But Danielle remained exactly where she was. No protective custody. No psychiatric hold. Just quiet, observant, and untouched. Investigators combed through Rayburn's office and found nearly nothing. No love letters. No photos. No personal notes. Only a single manila envelope, locked in his desk drawer. Inside, a copy of Danielle's intake form, a receipt for the wedding ring, paid in cash, and a handwritten list of 5 names. All guards. All transferred out in the last 18 months. No context. No explanation. But one of those names belonged to a former Eastbridge officer, Glenn Remick, who quit abruptly and moved to Nevada after a disciplinary hearing, one that never made it into Rayburn's official logs. When investigators tried to reach him, he was already dead. Overdose. No note. No witnesses. The marriage, it seemed, was just a final move in a long, invisible game. And Danielle? She didn't mourn. She didn't cry. But during a routine cell check 1 week after the funeral, a rookie CO noticed something scratched lightly into the wall above her bed. 5 words. Clean. Precise. Deep enough to stay. You can't cage what watches. No one could explain what it meant. But the warden was dead. The inmate was still breathing. And somewhere between vows and violence, love had become a weapon. Eastbridge Correctional Facility had secrets. Everyone knew it. But until Clifford Rayburn ended up dead in his own living room, no one had a reason to look too closely. The prison ran on fear, silence, and well-oiled routines. But now, the rhythm was broken, and under the weight of a public scandal threatening to boil over, cracks began to show. Internal Affairs swept in 2 days after the autopsy confirmed blunt force trauma. Their presence didn't go unnoticed. Every guard who had once laughed in the break room now avoided eye contact. Every inmate watched, quietly calculating what it meant that the one man who ran the place had just been buried wearing a wedding band with an inmate's name behind it. And in the middle of it all, Danielle Knox sat in cell 2A, reading The Art of War like it was a bedtime story. Calm, composed, unbothered. But what they didn't know, what even the investigators hadn't pieced together, was that Danielle had been pulling threads long before the wedding, long before the warden. Her manipulation didn't start in the chapel. It started in the infrastructure. It started with the cameras. IT technician Benjamin Rocks had worked at Eastbridge for 6 years. Quiet guy. First to clock in, last to leave. He handled security systems, maintenance logs, and server backups. And 3 weeks before the warden's death, he'd submitted a report about unusual network activity on the prison's internal server. His supervisor dismissed it. It's probably just another update glitch. But Rocks wasn't satisfied. He kept digging. What he found disturbed him. Dozens of surveillance files, deleted, not just missing, not just corrupted, wiped clean, and not from the control room either. These deletions had come from a remote access point inside the prison itself, a hidden terminal, a modified laptop hardwired into the infirmary storage closet, Danielle's infirmary. Rock scheduled a private meeting with Warden Rayburn. No one knows what was said during that conversation, only that afterward, Rock submitted a sudden request for emergency leave and never came back. 2 weeks later, Rayburn was dead, and when Internal Affairs tried to find Benjamin Rocks to interview him, his apartment was empty, lease abandoned, no forwarding address, not a trace. Then came the records, or lack thereof. Danielle Knox's prison file had been tampered with. Pages were out of order. Medical reports were redacted. One psychologist's evaluation was signed, but undated. Another note had been sloppily whited out and rewritten. Patient exhibit signs of manipulative behavior was scratched into patient exhibit signs of depression. The staff psychologist, Dr. Kendra Monroe, had mysteriously resigned 6 months earlier after a personal conflict with Rayburn. She never returned calls. Her license expired. Her practice never reopened. Then there was a list. The one found in Rayburn's drawer. 5 names, all guards who had transferred out in the last 18 months. Glenn Remick, overdose. Joseph Tierney, missing. Marcus Holloway, retired early, whereabouts unknown. Nathan Dorsey, died in a boating accident. Alonzo Webb, still working, but now at a federal facility 400 miles away. That wasn't coincidence. That was cleanup. Internal Affairs tried to question Webb. He refused to talk. Lawyered up before they even called. I signed a confidentiality agreement, was all he said. Whatever happened at East, Bridge died with the warden. Meanwhile, Danielle's influence grew without saying a word. Guards still brought her tea. She got extra towels, extra time in the rec yard, first pick of commissary. No one challenged her. No one punished her. It was as if the system around her had been rearranged, and no one dared question who was doing the arranging. One officer finally broke. CO Ramona Bexley, 6 years on the job, 2 kids at home, no disciplinary record. She walked into the warden's former office one morning, sat across from the acting deputy, and whispered, "She's got dirt on all of them." "Who?" the deputy asked. Danielle, she said, or whatever her real name is. She has files, secrets, and if you don't give her what she wants, she ruins you. That's what happened to Remick. That's what happened to Tierney. That's why Clifford. She didn't finish the sentence. The next day, Bexley was gone. Transferred. Overnight. No explanation. No farewell. And that was the problem. Everyone who spoke vanished. Meanwhile, Danielle continued to receive handwritten notes through meal trays. All unsigned. All in the same tight, slanted handwriting. Investigators tried to trace them. They failed. Then, on a routine cell inspection, they found something taped under her bed frame. A burner phone. Wiped clean. But one photo remained in the cache. It showed Clifford Rayburn, shirtless, laughing, sitting at the edge of what looked like a bed, not in the prison, at home, taken 2 nights before his death. The timestamp didn't lie. It raised more questions than answers. Why would a man like Rayburn risk everything? Why would he let her photograph him? And who else had been pulled into her web before she even got to him? Danielle didn't answer questions, but she said something once to a nurse during routine blood work. "You know the problem with this place?" she said softly as the needle pierced her arm. "It's not that it's broken. It's that no one thinks it can be controlled. But anything can be controlled if you know what they're hiding." Then she smiled. The same smile she wore when the warden married her. The same smile she had when they zipped his body into a black bag. Eastbridge wasn't just a prison anymore. It was her system. And every secret inside was a weapon waiting to be used. Warden Clifford Rayburn's body was found on the 3rd morning after his wedding. Sprawled across his living room floor, half-dressed, a champagne glass shattered beside his outstretched hand. There were no signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds, no DNA evidence, except his own, just a blunt force trauma to the back of the skull and a haunting stillness that suggested he never saw it coming. The official cause of death? Accidental fall. But no one bought it, especially not the officers who'd seen Clifford's temperament. The man didn't fall. He controlled. He calculated. He ran Eastbridge like a god behind steel gates. If he died, it wasn't by accident. It was design. The autopsy left out 2 things. First, Clifford's blood work revealed sedatives in his system, enough to make him groggy, disoriented, but not enough to knock him out. He had been walking when he was hit. Second, there was a small, circular bruise on the inside of his right wrist, about the size of a cufflink, pressed deep into the skin like someone had held him there, firmly, just long enough. But the bruising? Not mentioned in the public report, not even photographed. That's when things started to unravel, quietly behind the scenes. The lead medical examiner, Dr. Bennett Kane, submitted his resignation 4 days after filing the autopsy. No warning, no press conference. His lab was cleared overnight, and the report he submitted was sealed for privacy due to marital sensitivity. They were already burying the truth. And as Clifford's casket was lowered into ground, Danielle Knox was watching from a TV in her cell, calm, cross-legged, sipping tea. And when the camera panned to his grieving sister, Danielle smirked. A flicker, almost imperceptible, but real. Later that same evening, Officer Reynolds, one of the last people to see Clifford alive, requested leave, said he was sick, never returned. His locker was emptied out by someone else. No note, no contact, just gone. Internal Affairs had no choice but to return. But this time, they weren't met with silence. They were met with obstruction. Evidence boxes were missing. CCTV archives had been wiped. The entire week of Clifford's death, gone from the system, logged as server malfunction. And when the IT department was questioned, no one knew who signed off on the deletions. Because the signature at the bottom, it wasn't a name, just a number, 017A. Danielle's original inmate classification. Someone had given her access, real access, not just extra rec time or stolen glances from the guards. Someone had let her rewrite the records, alter the camera feeds, control the narrative. One person, or multiple people. Either way, it was an operation. And the further they dug, the deeper it went. Warden Rayburn's bank account had been emptied 2 days before his death, transferred through a chain of dummy corporations in the Caymans. At the same time, 3 guards received anonymous deposits of $20,000 into new crypto wallets, created from the same IP address logged in Danielle's file 3 months earlier. They had helped her, whether they knew it or not. But perhaps the most damning piece was this: a letter found inside Clifford's desk drawer. It wasn't addressed to anyone. No date, no signature, just a simple note. You think this place belongs to you, but you forgot who really understands how systems work. It's not the builders. It's the ones who live in the walls. Investigators assumed it was a threat, a message, but handwriting analysis revealed something else. It matched a letter Danielle had written to her public defender during her first year at Eastbridge. She'd written it herself, the night before the wedding. So why marry him? Why spend 3 days as his wife, only to kill him? Because that was the plan. The marriage was the final act, the legal binding, the one thing that gave her spousal privilege, inheritance rights, and power. In the eyes of the law, Danielle Knox wasn't just his killer. She was his widow. And in the prison system, that changed everything. She couldn't be compelled to testify. Not about their relationship. Not about their communication. Not even about the night he died. She was protected, untouchable. And yet, she never ran. Never asked for release. She stayed in her cell, quiet and composed, letting the world spin around her. Because the game wasn't over. The final move hadn't been made. And somewhere in the mess of sealed reports, vanished guards, and doctored footage was the truth, rotting in silence. Just like Clifford Rayburn. And the ones who helped her? They were still inside Eastbridge. Living, breathing, watching, waiting for her next signal. The name Danielle Knox never left Eastbridge Correctional Facility. Not even after the funeral. Not after the press backed off. Not even after Internal Affairs closed the case and washed their hands of the mess. Her name became a whispered threat in the staff locker rooms, an omen muttered under breath during rounds, a ghost that haunted every broken camera feed and misplaced file. But was she a monster or just the system's reflection? The question tore the prison apart from the inside, because no one could agree. To some, she was a manipulative predator, a master of psychological warfare, who seduced and destroyed a man sworn to protect the law. To others, she was something far more dangerous, a woman who had survived the system, studied its corruption, and turned it against itself with precision. But the public wanted a verdict. And Danielle? She didn't give them one. She refused interviews, refused media requests. Even during her post-trial evaluation, she barely spoke. Only once did she respond to the psychiatrist assigned to evaluate her risk level. He asked, "Do you feel remorse for what happened to Warden Rayburn?" She didn't blink. "Remorse is for mistakes," she said. That wasn't one. The room went cold. The state moved to press charges. Again. This time for obstruction, conspiracy, and possible second-degree murder. But with the surveillance wiped and the only eyewitnesses either dead or mysteriously relocated, the case collapsed. There was no evidence that directly tied her to the killing. She wasn't found innocent. She was unproven. A legal limbo. They couldn't release her, but they couldn't sentence her again. So she stayed. Same cell, same smirk, same slow, deliberate pacing during rec time, as if counting the cracks in the concrete beneath her feet. What they didn't know, what no one had dared say aloud, was that Danielle still had influence. For guards had quietly requested transfers since the wedding. 2 resigned altogether. And the new recruits, they came in already afraid of her. Somehow, even from behind bars, she ruled. That's when rumors began to spread. About a list. A kill list. Not of targets, but of debts. People who had helped her. Each of them marked with a symbol only she understood. And people who had crossed her. Each of them marked in red ink. There was no proof the list existed. But when Officer Melvin Ross was found slumped over his steering wheel 3 weeks after testifying against her, his seatbelt twisted tightly around his throat, and his car engine still running, everyone started to believe. The death was ruled a suicide. The internet didn't agree. True crime forums exploded. TikTok sleuths picked apart grainy footage. Reddit threads circulated theories that Danielle had orchestrated it all. Through burner phones, encrypted letters, or even a corrupt nurse who owed her favors from years ago. A viral post titled The Black Widow of Eastbridge gained over 2.3 million views in a week. Some fans admired her. Others feared her. But both sides agreed on one thing. Justice never came. At least not in the courtroom. Because Danielle Knox never paid for what she did. Not in the way the state expected. Not in the way Clifford Rayburn's family demanded. But perhaps, just perhaps, justice wasn't the point. Because Danielle didn't just kill a man. She didn't just infect a system. She changed it. After the incident, Eastbridge implemented 47 new security policies. Female inmates were reclassified. Staff rotation doubled. Romantic interactions criminalized with harsher penalties. The entire facility was restructured. But it was too late. The blueprint had already been written in blood and silence. And Danielle? She just watched it all unfold. Every now and then she received letters from women in other prisons, from correctional officers who never met her but felt her presence, from journalists who wanted a quote. She never responded, except once. One envelope, one letter, typed anonymous, delivered to an investigative reporter in New York. It read, "You think justice is a verdict, but justice, like systems, is about control. And sometimes the only way to fix a rotten institution is to remind it how dangerous a forgotten can be." No signature, just a number, 017A. The same number burned into Eastbridge's records. The same number Clifford once wrote on her wedding ring. So was it justice or revenge? Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Because whatever it was, Danielle Knox had delivered it. If this story stunned you, don't let it end here. Subscribe now to the Family Crime Exposed for more untold stories of betrayal, power, and revenge. Every week, we dive into real cases that the headlines forgot, but the victims never could. Like, share and hit the bell icon, because the truth doesn't whisper, it echoes. And around here, silence always has a body count, and the world would never forget her name.